The following is an Encore episode. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. In 2016, a wildfire escaped the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It killed 14 people, injured dozens more, and destroyed parts of Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge.
Park officials were not ready to do. They were not used to these types of events. One mistake after another, unfortunately, led to a pretty awful week.
4 decades ago, rice seeds from Laos crossed the ocean to California and made their way to a family of Hmong farmers in North Carolina.
Lo and behold, the thing germinated, took off, and it almost grew as tall as, as a full-grown adult.
And the Appalachian Trail has been exhaustively hiked, explored, and written about, but it's still got a few secrets left. You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. When a company called AppHarvest built its first greenhouse in 2020, it was touted as no less than the future of farming, and even Appalachia itself. The startup was built on the idea of using cutting-edge technology and local workers to produce vegetables on an industrial scale. And this was all set to happen in eastern Kentucky, where the company's founder said this new version of agriculture could help replace the fading coal industry. AppHarvest got a lot of attention from national media, politicians, and investors. But then last year, the company filed for bankruptcy. Austin Gaffney recently reported on the downfall of AppHarvest in a story for Grist. I spoke with Austin to learn more. Austin Gaffney, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia to speak with us today.
Thanks for having me again. I really appreciate it.
So AppHarvest has received a lot of media attention from the time it was founded up through now, pretty much, in your story. But for folks who haven't heard of AppHarvest, can you tell us what this company did and what their pitch was?
So AppHarvest was founded by a Kentuckian named Jonathan Webb in January of 2018, basically saying that in order to revitalize the economy of Central Appalachia, we needed to bring in more blue-collar jobs. And his vision for these blue-collar jobs were sort of a spattering of 12 giant greenhouses, which grew produce like tomatoes and berries and lettuce indoors. And he built the first of those greenhouses in Moorhead, Kentucky, in Rowan County, in 2020 during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then he added 4 more greenhouses over the next couple of years.
AppHarvest checked off so many boxes that people talk about when they talk about economic development in Appalachia. They touted decent paying blue-collar jobs with benefits for locals, building out the local food system, diversifying the economy in a coal-producing region, even leaning in on private investment as opposed to just grants and public funding. Where did AppHarvest go wrong?
Based on my reporting, the biggest problem AppHarvest seemed to have was that it grew, I feel, too big too fast. So it went through 12 rounds of funding, raised over $800 million in seed and venture capital funding, along with loans from banks and national organizations like the USDA. And that was before they built their first greenhouse. They also started planning on going public. So you mentioned private investment. They partnered with basically what is a blank check company for the purpose of joining the stock market. So on top of lenders, they also now had stockholders to contend with to pay back all this money on sort of a low value product, which was tomatoes, lettuce, and berries. So by the summer of 2021, before they were open even a year, AppHarvest leadership admitted on an investor call that the company was staring down a $32 million net loss. That same day, stocks dropped 29%. And in the following months, the company was facing 5 different lawsuits alleging securities fraud. Basically, stockholders were saying that leadership had lied about the productivity in the greenhouses and the success of the company. So through these suits, AppHarvest leadership was repeatedly cited as blaming employee training, turnover, and, quote, a poor work ethic on the root causes of the company's failures to achieve profitability. So basically, rather than working out the kinks in its first year of operation, AppHarvest built 5 greenhouses while selling a low value product and blamed its failures in some ways on the laborers that kept the company going.
So AppHarvest isn't the only indoor agriculture project in the U.S. or even here in Appalachia. But as you note, multiple companies have closed or filed for bankruptcy in the last few years. Why is this particular industry so challenging?
So traditional farming relies on sort of labor, but also sun, rain, and soil. In controlled environment agriculture, this type of industry relies on a reproduction of at least one of those, which is largely energy. So in the example of AppHarvest, the greenhouses rely on a hydroponic system, the reproduction of heat, of light, and pulling in water from retention ponds. In Kentucky, we rely on coal for nearly 70% of our electricity. And so the production of this produce is also tied to increased greenhouse gas emissions. The cost of those lights and the robotics that power parts of these facilities, especially when tied to commodified fossil fuels, can make this industry prohibitively expensive. But over the last decade, there's been an influx of venture capital funding into this industry, and the CEA market is predicted to be worth $3 billion by next year. So while the high cost of these facilities have accumulated quickly, they've also led to like a domino of bankruptcies and closures, especially over the last couple of years.
So your story for Grist has the headline, "A Celebrated Startup Promised Kentuckians Green Jobs. It gave them a, quote, grueling hell on earth," unquote. There's a lot in the story about how AppHarvest tried to cut its labor costs. What was that experience like for workers?
The biggest complaints I learned from employees were how the big promises that AppHarvest made in its initial couple years failed to match their actual working environment. So when people were hired, especially at the inaugural Moorhead greenhouse, they were deeply excited to join this new company, which had this big mission, which they felt like was contributing to a sustainable future. So some of the employees told me that they would skip down the aisles during their first couple weeks or months of work because they were so excited to be there. But basically, after a few weeks of working from the initial hire in October 2020, workers said they were told they needed to work overtime, including weekends. And one employee said when she complained, her supervisor told her she needed to learn to sacrifice. By the spring and the summer, extreme heat descended into the greenhouse. Former workers reported heat indexes that could reach into the 140s and the 150s, but often hovered in the territory of what the National Weather Service calls extreme danger, which is anything above 126 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's what these employees called a grueling hell on earth. They complained of heat exhaustion, rashes, dehydration, and also dangerous working conditions where glass panels could fall from the greenhouse ceiling or tomato wires could snap. And then this kind of mismanagement or dissatisfaction also bled into the corporate office that was based in Lexington. Former workers told me the leadership team was disorganized and the goals of their positions were not clearly stated. One corporate worker told me they felt like they've been sold a beautiful pipe dream, something that felt sustainable and new and that could make it in Kentucky, but they said it turned out just to be a nightmare.
Well, the story goes through a lot of ways that AppHarvest got things wrong. Is there a different version of AppHarvest and that business model that could potentially work in Appalachia?
It's sort of speculative, so obviously I can't say for certain, but I think like all climate solutions, there's a space for a renewable grid-powered version of AppHarvest that could be one piece in sort of a puzzle of solutions for a future food economy that also includes small-scale family farm markets that are sustainable and take care of our soil. But in order to feed our growing world, solutions like controlled environment agriculture, where we produce sort of a high yield in a smaller facility without continuing to infringe on our forests and biodiversity, I think there is a space for that. But AppHarvest grew so quickly that they weren't able to kind of trial and error a new type of economy with a totally new workforce. So maybe if App Harvest had had one greenhouse over 3 years or 5 years or 10 years and sort of developed that workforce pipeline over time, they could have been successful. But instead, they built 5 greenhouses in less than 3 years. At that scale, it's not that the science of CEA is wrong, but basically it's expensive. Plants are finicky, especially in indoor agriculture. If a disease or a pathogen takes hold, it can spread like wildfire. So I think they needed more room to make mistakes in their first few years and maybe have less money to pay back in their first few years than they were able to do.
Alston, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia and speaking with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
That was reporter Alston Gaffney. We'll link her story on our website, wvpublic.org. High Street in Morgantown, West Virginia is a bustling strip. On any given day, locals and students from West Virginia University can be found enjoying its many restaurants, bars, and special events. Tucked away off the main drag is a place called Yama. It's a cozy diner that's been serving up home-style Japanese food since the 1990s. It's a place where Japanese students and staff can share their language, culture, and food. It's also a place of comfort and connection for the larger community. Folkways reporter Lauren Griffin has the story.
As you walk into Yama, the workers greet you with a warm smile.
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
The restaurant invites you to slow down and spend some time connecting. You can grab a manga comic to read or enjoy the Japanese TV playing in the background. The food here is different from what you typically find in nearby Japanese restaurants. Less sushi, more comfort foods, like katsudon, a pork cutlet over rice. Yama attracts die-hard regulars.
My name is Sun. I'm originally from Korea, but I've been living in Morgantown since 2005. I come here once or twice a week.
People are kind of obsessed with this place.
Honestly, I got a little bit annoyed when they closed down a lot during COVID. I always had to check my Instagram or Facebook to check their business hours.
Yama the restaurant was started by Yama the man back in the 1990s. Yama prioritized hiring staff that were Japanese or Japanese American. People like Miki Carducci. She's from Osaka, Japan, and has been working at Yama for years. She loves the food, especially the teriyaki tofu.
So crispy, and it's like melty tofu in the middle. So teriyaki tofu isn't what Japanese people eat. That's his creation.
Yama's creation. Yama was a trained chef, but he wanted to run a more casual restaurant. In Japan, he operated a bar that attracted university students, just like the spot he created in Morgantown. About half the workers are students. Carducci's son, Hugo, recently started working at Yama with his mom.
It's funny. There's sometimes, especially like when I was being trained as a server, she would not like yell at me, but kind of scold me a little bit if I didn't do things right.
Hugo says growing up, he rarely met other Japanese people. The Japanese community in West Virginia is very small.
I moved to Greenbrier County, Lewisburg. A lot of people there have never seen an Asian person before. People saying like, are you Chinese? And I'll say like, no, I'm Japanese. It's like, oh, like it's the same thing.
Hugo's now a student at West Virginia University down the street. For him, Yama is a community space that lets him explore and share in his Japanese identity.
Actually, the other day, someone came in and just like ordered all in Japanese, and we had an entire conversation in Japanese. It was like 10, 15 minutes. We're one of the only places here in Morgantown that can offer that.
I used to be a regular. I studied Japanese at WVU, and I would hang out at Yama's for hours with friends, like Kaoru Shirashi. I called him up recently, and he told me how he felt when he first arrived in Morgantown.
It's just nothing there. I was a little bit afraid.
But Yama became a comforting place for him and other Japanese students at WVU. It reminded them of home.
I feel like I'm in Japan, even though in Yama restaurant in West Virginia.
And Yama-san himself was a big part of that. He would remember customers and sometimes bring you a little treat, like mochi ice cream.
If you go one time, he knows customer's face. Next time when you go, surprisingly, he noticed us and with name.
But Yama-san's not at the restaurant anymore. He retired a few years ago and moved back to Japan. Now there's a new owner.
My name is Min Kim, and I'm the owner of this restaurant, Yama Japanese. I've been operating this restaurant since 2016.
Before Min took over, she had never worked in a restaurant. Her primary focus was raising her daughter. But she heard from a friend that Yama was looking for help. Min needed a job, and Yama needed a successor, even one that didn't know much about running a restaurant.
So basically, no experience at all, but I learned and then trained by Mr. Yama. He always complained about me. This is not house kitchen. Min, no, this is business. You can't do this way, do that way.
Min apprenticed with Yama-san for 4 years, learning his recipes and the ins and outs of the kitchen.
The most challenging dish was tempura. Because Yama-san, he graduated from culinary school. I don't know, his body and especially hands are very different. So he can't even touch the hot boiling oil, which I cannot do it.
Min is a trained cook now and has perfected all of Yama's dishes. But she's not Japanese. She's Korean.
Some customer, they know I'm Korean. So they ask, why don't you add some Korean to your menu? But I just want to keep Yama as a Japanese in a home-style restaurant.
Min says her apprenticeship with Yama-san was more than just learning recipes. She was also becoming part of a family.
Yama itself, it has its own energy, like in a living creature. It's just not a place.
Papering the corner of the restaurant are postcards, letters, and doodles from customers expressing their love for Yama, its food, and its people.
The food is not only something you eat, it delivers so many, emotions and other stuff that you can see. So it is restaurant, but we provide something other than food. Sometimes you see customers really down, depressed, but they still come because they need comfort food. And just bring some sweetness to them. Come on, this is extra for you to make you cheer up.
Yama is a little pocket of Japan among the hills of West Virginia. Many who come here simply love the food, but there are also hidden depths in a bowl of Yama's ramen.
Thank you.
For Inside Appalachia, I'm Lauren Griffin in Morgantown, West Virginia.
That story was part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in our region. You can find dozens more Folkways stories at our website, wvpublic.org. Coming up, fish fries. Whiting with hot sauce isn't just delicious. It's also a way for people to support their community. You're Inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, focusing on students' futures. Classes available at concord.edu/apply.
When you think of rice, you might not think of Western North Carolina, but the area is home to several varieties of heirloom rice that made their way here from Laos nearly 5 decades ago. The rice was carried and cultivated by Hmong refugees who were displaced by war. One family is now selling their rice at markets and to restaurants, and they've built a passionate following. Folkways reporter Rachel Moore has this story.
On a chilly October morning at the Asheville City Market, there's a line in front of Tu Lee's stall. It's 15 minutes before the market officially opens, but customers have lined up to snag bags of fresh rice.
Good morning. How are you, buddy?
Good. Do you have any rice?
I've got 2 varieties, a little bit of each. This is a sweet sticky rice. Sweet sticky rice is well known. The red rice has got a very nice chestnut kind of taste to it.
So it's not sticky?
It is semi-sticky.
Semi?
Yeah.
Okay, I prefer that.
Yep.
All right, so I'll do that.
Tu and his wife Chu are the owners of Lee's One Fortune Farm in Morganton, North Carolina. Each of the 4 rice varieties they grow are distinct. Take their sweet sticky rice, for example.
The sweet sticky rice has a very nice kind of a honey sugarcane aroma, a subtle freshness that is hard to explain.
Yeah, you have to experience and smell it for yourself to understand.
When people ask about a wonderful fresh loaf of bread that you bake and comes straight out of the oven,
the sweet sticky rice is probably their most special variety. It has an almost mythological beginning here in North Carolina. It all started with just a handful of seeds, passed down through a network of Hmong farmers.
Someone visited Laos back in the 80s after they came to the United States, they were able to visit their families and acquire the not even ounces worth of seed. I would say no more than maybe 40, 50 seeds.
The seed made its way across the ocean into a Hmong community in California.
It grew, but it didn't grow well.
So the people in California sent some seeds to friends in North Carolina to see if their luck was any better.
Lo and behold, the thing germinated, took off, and it almost grew as tall as as a full-grown adult.
The Lees eventually got some of the seeds, and they've been growing it ever since. Tu says that after nearly 40 years in North Carolina, the rice is completely adapted to this area.
It started off as an heirloom from Laos, but as many years as it's been here in western North Carolina, it might as well be considered heirloom in the western North Carolina area.
Although the rice is adapted to western North Carolina, it still requires a lot of work. Tu and Chu's farm in Morganton is a testament to the work they're willing to do to carry on tradition. Like many Hmong refugees who were displaced by war in Laos, Tu and Chu arrived in the United States about 40 years ago. They've made it a goal to stay connected to their Hmong heritage, and growing rice is an important part of that. The Lees had to establish their rice field in a low-lying area. Tu drives us down a steep, rocky road to get to the field. It's about a mile from the rest of the farm.
It's not that bad of a walk, but remember, it's 1 mile down and 10 miles back.
Each year, the Lees have to flood the field before processing the rice. The rice doesn't grow in a traditional paddy, but it does require about 8 to 10 inches of water to help control the weeds.
It is a tremendous amount of work.
And that's not to mention saving the seeds, which has to be done completely by hand.
When the rice starts to mature, we actually go in there with buckets or bags, and we walk around, hand select the most plump, the most well-defined rice that's on the stalk, and we hand harvest those just for seed.
Over the years, Tu and Chu started using machines to help them with the planting, harvesting, and hulling. Tools like a combine or a rice huller allow them to keep up with their growing demand. Today, Tu, Chu, and his aunt are drying and hulling some of their sticky rice. Hulling the rice removes its outer layer, so you're left with just the grain itself. It's what makes the rice edible. First, Tu's aunt scoops the rice into a pot of water heated by a wood stove. She skims off any debris that was brought in from the field when it was harvested. Then the rice is strained, and Chu toasts it in a giant wok to start the drying process. There's a warm, nutty aroma in the air, almost like barley.
So what I'm doing is stirring so that it won't get stuck on the bottom or burnt. You hear the little popping, that means the rice is getting toast.
The last step before hulling is letting the rice dry in huge tarps. After Tu runs the rice through his hulling machine, it's ready to cook. Aside from the hulling machine, the Lees process rice pretty much the same way their families did while they were growing up in Laos. Growing rice may have its challenges, but Tu says it's important to keep doing.
The rice is something that brings our families back to remembering what our culture was in the old country and how we want to continue our culture here.
The rice is also an important piece of the Hmong New Year, a huge annual celebration that Tu says is similar to Thanksgiving in the U.S. It's a highlight of each year. In fact, the rice harvest is an important lead-up to the New Year celebrations. Tu says Hmong farmers often time the rice harvest so they can be sure to have fresh new rice to share. During the New Year, families from near and far come together. It might be the only time you get to see someone all year, so you have to make it count.
When the family gather, you got this fresh new rice. You cook that, and that is a means of making something that the whole family can enjoy together.
And because the New Year is so close to Thanksgiving, it means that Hmong families like Tu and Chu's can often celebrate both holidays at once. Blending cultures like this is just another way the Lees have adapted to make Western North Carolina their home. Now that they've been selling their produce and rice for almost a decade, They can look back on how far they've come and the impact they've had in sharing their culture with others. Growing and selling produce that isn't common around here can be hard after all. Tu says when they started going to farmers markets, not many people knew what they offered.
I knew it was going to be tough to start out with because people didn't know what you have, so it's a tough sell. And we knew it was going to take a long time to develop it, and it did.
So he takes it upon himself to educate people and help spread the word. He teaches people how to use produce and will throw in Hmong recipes that they can try. Think young, sticky green rice with succulent Hmong sausage, stuffed bitter melon, or charcoal roasted Japanese sweet potatoes. Tu says their customers have learned to treat the rice with respect. They know how special it is. You can see this in action at the farmers market each week.
Have you bought the rice before?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you know how to treat it, put it in the refrigerator, not lose.
Yeah, I put it in the freezer and use it all year. I gave away all the rest of my dried rice because it's not even edible anymore as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, I look forward to it every year and get as much in my freezer as I can.
There are people who come back year after year for the rice, and there are newcomers who are excited for a new experience. Tu and Chu were one of many Hmong families who were able to make rice thrive in western North Carolina, and the community has shown they're willing to support it.
The rice just seems to be in its home.
For Inside Appalachia, I'm Rachel Moore in Morganton, North Carolina.
That story was part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in the region. You can find dozens more Folkways stories at our website, wvpublic.org. Human trafficking can be an almost invisible crime. It persists because most of us don't know what to look for or what to notice. WVPB News Director Eric Douglas spoke with West Virginia law enforcement officials about how to spot human trafficking. A warning, some of the topics in this story may be difficult for some listeners.
It is probable that many of us have encountered a person who is being trafficked, and we just didn't realize it.
That's not what we're seeing. We're not seeing young girls being kidnapped off the streets of West Virginia and being shipped overseas. Unfortunately, the crime's happening right here in our backyard.
That was William Thompson. He's the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of West Virginia. He says teachers, faith, and other group leaders can be on the lookout for young people caught up in human trafficking.
One is watch for absences like on Fridays and Mondays for like long weekends. Also watch for all of a sudden a person comes in with a new expensive phone or toy or something that doesn't quite fit. To watch tattoos. Unfortunately, some human traffickers want to use tattoos as a way of keeping track, for lack of a better term. Look for them to have a person to have a significantly older boyfriend or female companion. Someone, it just doesn't make sense.
Thompson said the weekend absences may mean the young people may be taken elsewhere for sex work.
Because of our location, if you think about it, 6 to 8 hours in a car, you can be within probably 50% of the United States population. We're not that far from a lot of major metropolitan areas.
Right.
So a lot of them are being used on the weekends where they're being trafficked to and from, Columbus, Detroit, New York, some of the same places where we get illegal, other bad things coming to us.
William Ehlenfeld is Thompson's counterpart. He is the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of the state. He explained that whether it is labor trafficking or sex trafficking, victims are isolated from anyone who can help.
Basically they're cut off from communication with anyone that might be able to help them. So they're not necessarily being moved from place to place when it comes to labor trafficking, although that's possible. And then, with sex trafficking, it's situations where police officers might think it was just a prostitution ring, but in many instances, the females who are involved are victims, and they are being forced to engage in this type of activity by the person who is in control of the situation.
According to Ehlenfeld, often these are vulnerable people. They might be a runaway. They may have suffered some sort of trauma in their life, or they might have a substance abuse problem. And it is often a member of the family committing the crime.
It's not something that is always obvious. I've heard it referred to as an invisible crime because it's very difficult to see, but that's where trainings come in. I think all new officers should be trained in how to identify human trafficking.
There are various in-person seminars and resources of information on places like the Handle with Care WV website that provide information on what to look for. One way law enforcement becomes aware of the problem is when traffickers begin exchanging images or electronic messages.
The reason that we came onto the case that I mentioned a few minutes ago was because of images that were being exchanged between the mother of our victim and another person involved in the conspiracy. They were sending explicit images over the internet, and they were identified through various platforms as being pornographic, and that's how we were able to begin to look into this person who was involved in illicit sexual activity with minors.
Because of the nature of these crimes, the West Virginia Fusion Center, a data clearinghouse for law enforcement, has set up a human trafficking program. Samantha Dowles is the Human Trafficking Intelligence Analyst for the Fusion Center.
So I use different softwares and resources available to me at the Fusion Center to look through different platforms, look through different areas that traffickers may be utilizing to exploit their victims. And through that, I will look for red flags and different things that may lead me to believe that they are a potential victim or a potential trafficker.
Dowles has a master's degree in criminal justice. She says she compiles the information and presents what she finds to Homeland Security.
So when I do find a potential victim or a potential trafficker, we are very closely partnered with Homeland Security investigations in West Virginia. So I will put together a lead, is what we call it, and it's a report. And I will take that information that I can gather and send that to Homeland Security Investigations here in Charleston. And we kind of put our heads together, and they will open a case on whatever information I found if they find that viable.
There are state and federal statutes against human trafficking, but often it falls to the U.S. attorneys to prosecute it. For Thompson, that's a good thing.
We have the resources more so at the federal level. I come from the state level. I was a former state court judge for 15 years. I've saw a lot of it. And some of it is prosecuted at the state level. We have the resources, and our sentences are harsher on the federal level. So and this is one where I'm very glad they're harsher on the federal level, that it's good for us to get involved if we can.
Like most crimes, prosecution of human trafficking can take a long time. It may be hard to find evidence, and witnesses and victims may be reluctant to come forward to testify. It takes a team effort of investigators, prosecutors, and victim support staff to bring it all together. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Eric Douglas in Charleston.
Appalachia is one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, and its amphibians are a big part of that, like salamanders. My kids love catching red F's every spring. But have you ever heard of a West Virginia spring salamander? They're a species found in the General Davis Cave in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. Biologists think there may be as many as 300 of them in the system of caves, but that may be a generous estimate. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wants to put the West Virginia spring salamander on the endangered species list. Curtis Tate spoke with Will Harlan, a senior scientist at the Center for Biological Diversity.
Your organization says there are fewer than 300 spring salamanders left, all of them in Greenbrier County.
Yes, and that's a generous estimate. They only exist in this single cave system with this single stream flowing through it. And despite the critical habitat protections that this new listing will provide, they only provide to the subsurface habitat of this species. Above it is all private land, and unfortunately, there is logging and pond construction that will threaten this stream and its habit and the underground habitat. So still, the species will still face some threats even with this protection.
What can be done about it? Is a conservation easement possible?
Yes, so there are certainly some steps that can be taken, and it's still early. This is just the proposed rule, then the final rule has to be issued, and then there'll be more specifics that follow. Hopefully, the listing will encourage the private landowner to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service, the private landowners surrounding this habitat, to adopt habitat conservation plans that will mitigate the impacts to this species. That's essentially what happens, is private landowners are asked to voluntarily take mitigation measures to reduce their impact to this species. Now, ultimately, Fish and Wildlife Service can be more strong-armed, but they prefer to work with landowners to try to come up with voluntary measures to reduce their impact on endangered species.
How does the spring salamander rank among endangered species?
I would say this is one of the more endangered species in the country, with such a small population and only a single location remaining. It is incredibly vulnerable to extinction, and with no public lands surrounding it, it's essentially dependent on private landowners to do the right thing at this point, and that makes it an incredibly precarious position. So I would say this is among the most endangered species in the country. Thankfully, Fish and Wildlife Service has stepped in and provided not just endangered species status, but also critical habitat, which ensures that its essential habitat is permanently protected and every possible measure is taken to ensure that upstream impacts are minimized. So it has now a fighting chance.
Are other types of salamanders facing the same threats?
Unfortunately, yes, they're facing many of the same threats, but salamanders occupy a wide variety of niches, a wide variety of habitats. So some salamanders face different threats than others, but they all face some common themes in terms of threats. I think industrial logging, industrial mining, dams and development, dilution of water quality, water pollution, I think are kind of some of the common threats. But I'll mention some other salamanders in West Virginia that are also on the brink, that we're also awaiting a listing decision for. It could come any day. We were told it was supposed to come this month, so it could be within the next week. The yellow-spotted woodland salamander, Plethodon paulii, almost a completely different habitat than the cave salamander, but some similar overlap too. So this salamander only exists in the shale and sandstone outcrops that are also targeted by mountaintop removal mining. So this salamander hides in the crevices of these outcrops. There's only 21 populations left. Most of them are only of a single or a couple individuals. Only 65 of these salamanders have been seen in the last 20 years. So they're barely hanging on, and mountaintop removal mining is targeting the same habitat where they live. So that's an existential threat to this species, and we anticipate them being a finding coming from Fish and Wildlife Service that they are warranted for listing, hopefully this month. But there's also the Cheat Mountain salamander, which only exists in the Cheat Mountain region of West Virginia. And these salamanders don't have lungs, and they hide on the forest floor, essentially. They need moist, cool, damp habitat. And if those forests are logged or drought or other factors dry out their habitat, they're toast. So they need these cool, moist habitats that Appalachia has historically provided. All of our water, the number of rivers and streams flowing through the region, and the dense canopies historically have provided perfect habitat for salamanders. This is the salamander capital of the world. Appalachia is home to more species of salamander than anywhere else on the planet. But because of what we're doing to that habitat, we're jeopardizing a lot of these species.
That was Will Harlan of the Center for Biological Diversity, speaking with Curtis Tate. The Appalachian Trail was completed in 1927. For 25 years, hikers took to the trail and traveled along the mountains from Georgia to Maine. And in fact, it ran really close to my house here in Floyd County, Virginia. But then the trail was moved, and the old trail was nearly forgotten. Historian and podcaster Mills Kelly discovered the old trail and wrote about it in his new book, Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail. WMRA's Chris Boros spoke to Kelly about rediscovering the trail.
I just remember thinking it was really hard because I was hiking with a bunch of older boys who had much longer legs than me. But that's one memory. And the second was I was just so excited to be out on this trail. At the time, I didn't know that it went from Maine to Georgia, but I was just excited to be out backpacking.
When did you discover that there was this lost trail, and why did you want to write about it?
So I discovered it in 2018. I was working in the archives of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and I found this letter from 1929 talking about the trail running between Franklin and Floyd counties. And I thought to myself, the Appalachian Trail does not run through there. What is this all about? And of course, as a historian, when you see something that doesn't make any sense, then you have to find out more about it. So I just kept poking around in the archives and found more and more about it. And I realized this is a story I want to tell.
It seems like this story hasn't been told before. How did this get lost?
So in 1952 was the last year that the trail went through that part of southwestern Virginia, and then it was essentially written out of all the trail guides because they had to have trail guides for the current route, which was completely different. And so it just kind of vanished as a result. You know, the trail clubs lost interest in it because they weren't responsible for it anymore. Hikers stopped hiking on it because it wasn't the official Appalachian Trail anymore. And so it just kind of vanished away. But not for the people who live in Southwest Virginia. For them, it's still very much a part of their lives.
So this lost trail is still there to some extent?
West of the New River, the Iron Mountain Trail is the old Appalachian Trail. So you can hike more than half of it just by hiking the Iron Mountain Trail. On the east side of the river, it's just like little choppy bits and pieces here and there.
And why was the decision made to move it to begin with?
So there are a couple of reasons. One is that the Appalachian Trail is maintained entirely by volunteer clubs, and it was during the Great Depression, it was really hard to get a volunteer club to stick in southwestern Virginia. You know, people were just trying to survive, much less work on a trail. And also, it's a very unpopulated part of the state. Galax was the biggest city at the time, and it probably only had about 1,500 people in it. So there wasn't a large base of people to draw from to take care of the trail. So that was one problem. And then there was an opportunity, which was that the Jefferson National Forest expanded dramatically in the 1930s. And so there was this possibility of moving the trail into the National Forest and getting federal protection for the route.
What landmarks or interesting sites are on that original trail that maybe people aren't seeing as much of as they would have if it hadn't been moved?
They miss out on a lot, I'll just be honest.
Okay.
So on the east side of the New River, there's Bent Mountain Falls, which is the second highest waterfall in the state of Virginia. It's more of a cascade than a waterfall. You know, it goes down in various sections, but it's still really beautiful. The trail ran along the escarpment that is the edge of the Great Plateau of Southwest Virginia. So all along that escarpment, you get these spectacular views out over the Piedmont, and it's just really, really beautiful. And then also there's the Dan River Gorge, which is the most amazing part of the whole route. It's the headwaters of the Dan River, and right smack dab in the middle of that gorge is the Pinnacles of Dan. And it's this kind of pyramid-shaped mountain that just rises up out of the middle of this gorge. And the trail went up one side and to the pinnacle and then down the other, and is really an amazing hike.
Do you think that it was a good idea that they moved the trail, or should they have kept it?
In the end, I have to say it was probably the right choice because getting federal protection for the trail at the time was really important. After the Second World War, people started buying up more and more mountain land to build vacation homes and ski resorts and, lots of other things. And so moving the trail onto federally protected land was definitely the right choice. You miss out on a lot as a result, but in this case, I think it was a really good choice.
Have you discussed the Lost Trail on your podcast, The Green Tunnel? And talk about the podcast a little bit.
Sure. So, we have a whole episode about the Lost Trail on the Green Tunnel podcast. And so our podcast, which is about halfway through its third season, is a podcast on the history of the Appalachian Trail. And we discuss everything from the founding of the trail to things like the Lost Trail to specific iconic locations along the trail. Really spectacular spots or places that are really popular with hikers. And then I think one of our best episodes is the Appalachian Trail, which is a history of the privies all along the trail, because every trail shelter has a privy. And so, everything has a history, even the privies.
I'm sorry. I got to laugh. Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, it's a great title. I can't claim it. My friend Sarah Jones Stecker down in North Carolina, that's her title. But so it's we borrowed it from her.
I actually had to stop for a second and go, did he really just say that?
So yeah, it's a great episode.
If someone is intimidated about walking the whole Appalachian Trail, what would you say to them? And is there a small section here in the Valley or in Virginia somewhere where we can access it for a couple hours?
Yeah. So, first of all, it's actually not that hard to walk the entire trail. You just put your left foot in front of your right foot and then your right foot in front of your left foot, and you repeat that about 5 million times and you're there. But I don't recommend that strategy. It's not a great life strategy. Instead, I would recommend starting with a day hike and then kind of work your way up to, backpacking over a weekend or something, and then maybe a week and see how you like it. But a great day hike, not too far from, right just outside the valley, is in Linden, Virginia, and right where Highway 55 parallels Interstate 66, just a little east of Front Royal. And the trailhead right there on Route 55, if you hike north from there, you're on one of the oldest sections of the trail south of the Potomac River. And you go about 2.5 miles and you get to the Manassas Gap Shelter, which is one of the original trail shelters built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps and now maintained lovingly by me. And then you have lunch at the shelter at the picnic table, and then you turn around and hike back down to your car. And it's uphill to get to the shelter, but not brutal uphill at all. And then you have the advantage of walking downhill the whole way back.
What makes the trail so special to you, and why do you keep coming back?
It's special, I would say, for two reasons. One of those has just been part of the fabric of my life, and so it's just part of who I am, is spending time out hiking, and in particular on the Appalachian Trail. So I just feel at home there. But also, I just love the history of the trail because it's approaching its centennial in just a couple of years. And there's just so much history tied up in the trail. And I'm a historian, and so that part really appeals to me also.
That was WMRA's Chris Boros, speaking with author, historian, and hiker Mills Kelly. His new book is Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail from Arcadia Publishing. Kelly also hosts a podcast. It's called The Green Tunnel. A little earlier, we talked about the vast array of salamanders in Appalachia. Well, there are an awful lot of fish here in the region too. Bass, bluegills, and brook trout. But a new book by fisheries research scientist and WVU professor Stuart Welsh spotlights some of the lesser-known fish in central Appalachia. Bill Lynch spoke with Welsh about his book, Hornyheads, Mad Toms, and Darters.
Let's talk about hornyheads, mad toms, and darters. Can I maybe describe what a hornyhead or a mad tom or a darter is?
Yeah, so a hornyhead is a name for a group of minnows, and these are minnows that the males develop these little pointed horns on their head during the spawning season. They develop these horns, they grow these horns, and they use them to spar. They compete for females during the spawning season. in some ways, it's similar to a white-tailed deer with antlers in that, a deer grows its antlers and then loses the antlers after their breeding season. And it's the same situation with these horny head minnows. They grow these bumps on their head. They use them during the breeding season, and then they're lost afterwards, and then they regrow them the following year.
And Mad Toms, what are they like?
And Mad Toms are it's a name for a group of catfish. And most people, when you hear the word catfish, you think of big fish like channel catfish, blue catfish, flathead catfish. But Mad Toms are a group of catfishes that do not get very large. Their maximum size, depending on the species, may range from 3 to 6 inches in length. Most people don't see them because it's not a fish that you would often catch on hook and line. But we have quite a few different species of Mad Toms in the Appalachians, and they're very interesting little fish and certainly worth telling a story about. One thing I wanted to do with the book was to, tell stories about these small fish so people can maybe understand them better and get to know them a little bit better.
You're an ichthyologist, is that correct?
That's correct.
When, where, how did you first start taking interest in fish?
I think it was when I was a young kid. I really enjoyed fishing, and so I spent a lot of time in creeks and, not necessarily fishing all the time, but flipping rocks and looking for crayfish and aquatic salamanders and various critters. And I think that focus at an early age kind of sparked my interest, and I was able to keep it going into a career.
Kicking over rocks and fishing is one thing, but academic study of this, what kind of path is that?
Well, it's a long, tedious path, I guess you would say, but, it requires a lot of graduate work. I got a BS degree, at West Virginia University, and then I went on to get a master's degree at Frostburg State in fisheries management, and then I came back to West Virginia University for a PhD where I was focused on fisheries work.
How diverse is the fish population in Central Appalachia?
We have a lot of different kinds of fish. And for example, in West Virginia alone, which is certainly the heart of Appalachia, Central Appalachia, we have a list of species. It's 195. So there's a lot of different kinds of fishes that we have. And people are real familiar with the common ones, especially ones that you catch on rod and reel, but the smaller ones, a lot of people don't know about them very much. And so I think that's one of the opportunities for a book like this, is to provide information about those fish to let people learn a little bit more about them.
Talk about the book and putting it together.
It's a collection of stories on Central Appalachian fishes, and there are stories on some familiar fish, like the native brook trout, the smallmouth bass, the bluegill sunfish. But then there's also several stories on fishes that people know less about, such as in the title, horny heads, mad toms, and darters. And also, there's some fishes that are unusual that are discussed, like, for example, the lampreys, which are a group of fishes that are pretty small, but they have kind of an eel-like body. Then you've got a fish called the trout perch that I talk about, which is a really fascinating little fish of Central Appalachia.
How did you, narrow it down into which fish you wanted to deal with?
Yeah, that was a challenge because I find all the fishes that we have to be fascinating and interesting and worthy of a story. But I tried to just focus on some of the fishes that I thought would make the most interesting stories, because what I wanted to do was to write stories that would be both educational but also interesting for a wide audience. And so I tried to select fishes that had an interesting story to be told. Often that was related to a certain type of behavior. It may be to a certain type of feeding strategy, a certain type of spawning strategy. It was typically some aspect of that fish that I thought was interesting that I emphasized in the story.
What do you hope an average reader takes away from your book?
What I would hope is that people would realize that Central Appalachians have a diversity of fishes, that there's a lot to be learned. Often when you know more about something, you care about it more. And my hope in the end is that the book will increase the conservation of fishes in the Central Appalachians by making people more aware of the diversity that we have.
The book is called Horny Heads, Mad Toms, and Darters. Stuart Welsh, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Horny Heads, Mad Toms, and Darters is available from Ohio University Press. Till next time, Thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by David Mayfield, Chris Knight, John Blissard, John Ingram, Eric Vincent Huey, and Steve Earle. Bill Lynch is our producer. Xander Alloy is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.